Pursuant to Internal Revenue Service guidance, be advised that any federal tax advice contained in this program is not intended to be used, and it cannot be used by any person or entity for the purpose of avoiding any tax penalties that may be imposed by the Internal Revenue Service or any other U.S. federal taxing authority or agency, or promoting, marketing, or recommending to another party any transaction or matter addressed in this show. The opinions expressed by the host and the guests are their own and may not be used as authoritative advice. Any use of this material without the written consent of the host is strictly prohibited.
You're listening to the IRS Radio Hour with your host, Attorney Stephen Leahy, on AM 560, The Answer. Tune in every week at 5 for an informative discussion about IRS obligations, credit card debt, mortgage default, collection activity, and how to resolve these legal issues using tax resolution, debt settlement, mortgage loan modification, foreclosure defense, and bankruptcy. Your host is Stephen Leahy, a Chicago attorney and the principal at Oakham Tax Resolution and the law office of Stephen A. Leahy, P.C. Stephen is the author of Deal with Your IRS Problems Today. IRS and debt issues are serious, but there is help. There are resolutions. So get ready and take notes during the IRS Radio Hour. And now, here's your host, Attorney Stephen Leahy.
Hello, Chicago. And I am your host, Attorney Stephen Leahy, as the gentleman just said. I want to welcome you to another hour of our show. I want to welcome my co-host, Jim Leahy.
Hello, Chicago, and happy Sunday.
It is a great Sunday. The Hawks are playing, and so it's great. It's a great Sunday.
So, Steve, let's get right into our show. And I've been walking around the last couple of weeks, and some of our listeners have come up to me and they've asked me, how is it that I could find any kind of reports on Steve or what is it that he says? And I said, well, on the show, he does say, Google me. So, I mean, I guess you kids all know what that means. You adults, that just means look me up on a certain web page. So I did Google you, and I will say I saw some reviews. You can't sing or dance, but it seems that. But it seems as an attorney, people seem to be very happy with you. So I looked at the Better Business Bureau. It looked as though you had an A+. And I went to something called avvo.com. I don't know what that is, but it seems to be a reviews on attorneys. And there are 21 reviews on it.
Well, before we get into that, let me tell you what AVVO is. AVVO is a website. It's called avo.com. Avo.com is a website where people can go and ask attorneys questions. So if you have a legal question, you can post it online, and then attorneys answer them. So I've answered a lot of questions for people online. They'll ask a specific question. It can't be too specific because there is no attorney-client relationship on AVO, but some call it AVO, some call it AVO. I recently went to a
tomato.
That's right. I recently went to a conference with AVO. I think all the people on my side who were at the conference called it AVO, and all the people who worked there called it AVO. So maybe it's AVO, maybe it's AVO. But again, there's a lot of good information. So if you have a legal question and you can't reach me, because you should call me if you have a legal question.
That was going to be my next question. Yes, it's nice to go there, but we have other ways, don't we? And let's go into that. How do they reach you?
Absolutely, but you can always reach me from the show, which is the questions at IRSradiohour.com. You can always send an email to me. I'm always willing to answer legal questions of any sort and help you any way that I can.
And the phone number to reach you?
The phone number, 312-664-6649. Now, I know that sometimes this show can kind of sound like we're doing a infomercial. I don't want it to be an infomercial. I know that recently there's been, since 2008, since the big recession, there's been a lot of good issues out there, with IRS issues. Foreclosure been a huge issue since
there's been a lot of financial trouble. People in a lot of financial trouble. A lot of people out of work or working half part-time. Well, let me give you a couple of examples of what's on avo.com, avo or avo.com. People did say there's an understanding and knowledgeable attorney. Honest and great to have on your side. One said he's a great son. Oh, that must be your mother. With me side by side. I'm only kidding. That really isn't on there. With me side by side during the most stressful financial situation I have ever faced. A lawyer you can count on. Have faith in Steve when it is difficult to do with others. A lawyer with integrity. I could go on and on.
Yeah, I have a number. I've been lucky or blessed, I should say, because it's not really luck. But I've been blessed at a lot. I've had a lot of good clients who have been thankful enough and helpful enough to go to avo.com and write a review and say nice things about me. Often I don't have to ask them. They go there and they write these things, and it's a great form of advertisement, because I think, especially in this day and age, one of the first things people do when they're thinking about hiring a lawyer is you're going to go to Google and you're going to Google them. You're going to find out, and you're going to find out what other people have said about it. It's like going to a restaurant, right? Everybody goes to Yelp or something like that, and before you go to a restaurant, you want to see what others have said. If everybody says bad things about it, well, then chances are you're not going to try it yourself.
Well, that's true. So let's move on with the show. I want to go into this week's show. We want to recap a segment from last week that we really didn't get to, and I kind of blame myself that we went. I know we started talking about it, and then we got kind of interrupted and didn't get through them. We want to talk about, like I said, the ongoing saga, as I said last week, of the IRS and the troubles they seem to be having. We want to talk about the student loans and the effects that's having on people's financial futures and the financial problems
and the overall economy.
Mm-hmm. And then we'll get into there's a very important upcoming date or deadline for a new tax that was put in that was kind of, how it's written into legislation where no one really knows it's there until all of a sudden it's there. Nobody's claiming that they wrote it, but there's a huge new tax coming, and I think that we should put some time into talking about that.
And this has to do with foreign bank accounts and foreign financial institutions. There was always the Swiss were renowned for being private and not disclosing any of their depositors, and so there were a lot of people who would put money in there with the belief that nobody would ever find out. And what's happening in the last several years is that these institutions have been forced by our federal government to hand over these names, and when they do that, big repercussions to those who have those foreign accounts that they're not reporting to the IRS.
Well, as long as we just mentioned it, we might as well say the name of it. It's I guess they call it kind of it's called FATCA. Or I bet you they'll be calling it FATCA because that's the way that
they'll characterize it. Correct.
I hate to use one party over another, but there's a certain party that likes to demonize people who have been successful and who have money. And the problem with it, I believe, is that these people don't understand that the pie is supposed to expand. They don't see the pie expanding, so what they're doing is looking for more ways to get more money from people instead of having people make money and expand the economy. I believe that. So what we're talking about is something that comes in under the radar that's going to have a huge, huge impact on our lives. Kind of give us an overview of what we know about it, right?
Well, that's true, and I think that you've seen, if you've been paying attention to the news over the last several years, you've seen a lot of United States citizens giving up their citizenship.
I have seen that.
And the reason why that is because the IRS is starting to go after United States citizens that live abroad. And so I've had clients who have lived abroad for 30 or 40 years and never had a problem. And all of a sudden the IRS starts going after their bank accounts. And so the only way they can insulate themselves is to give up their citizenship.
And that, when have we ever heard that before in the history of this country? People giving up. This is the problem with the IRS growing at the size that it's growing. And the fact that the IRS has too much power. And this is why it's important that the people of this country understand what's happening, how it's happening, and what they can do to stop it.
Well, I agree with that. And the IRS has a lot of power, but it's also the size of the federal government, in my opinion, because they have an insatiable appetite for money. And I think just recently I read in the newspapers that the IRS has collected more money this in this year than they ever have before. And yet we still run deficits. So we're still looking for money. And the way they're going to get the money is they're going to come after citizens.
It seems just like the state of Illinois. The state of Illinois, every day they find something new to tax. I mean, here we live in a beautiful state. This is where we were born and raised, and we'll never leave. But the point being is they just don't understand that the pie has to expand. You can't just keep cutting the pie to little pieces and trying to cut more and more out. You want people to invest. You want the economy to grow. We need to be able to expand and bring the economy up to levels that will fill their coffers and let people keep their own money.
Well, so if you have a question, call me at 312-664-6649, or you can visit our website at chicagotaxteam.com, and we're going to come right back, and we're going to get into some of the meat of how to resolve these problems.
See you on the other side.
Welcome back to the IRS Radio Hour with attorney Stephen Leahy. Stephen has helped hundreds of Chicagoans recover from financial disaster, and he wants to help you and your family. There are resolutions, and you will hear about all those resolutions during today's informative discussion on the IRS Radio Hour on AM 560 The Answer. Now, here's your host, attorney Stephen Leahy.
Welcome back. Before I go on, I wanted to mention that the song that you hear right before this, that's Taxman from the Beatles.
I did not know that.
I love that song.
Well, but
again,
that's not one of my favorite Beatles songs, but it's up there.
Well, it happens to be one of my favorite now.
So. Well, Steve, like I said in the introduction, last week we were talking. We got to a part and. You said to me that there is 6 things you can do if you owe the IRS money. And I believe we got to 3 and then we skipped to 6 and then we kind of cut in. I think that since this is what this show is all about, I think that it's important that we get back and maybe cover those 6 again and maybe give it a little bit of detail and, go to all 6 instead of skipping around. So, what are the 6 things? Hey, Steve, what are the 6 things you can do when you owe the IRS money?
Well, I have to agree with you that this is important, and it's in my book. And if you'd like a copy of my book,
you wrote a book.
I did, and it's how to deal with your IRS problems today. And in that book, I detail 6 of these 6 things that you can do if you owe the IRS money. And remember, the first thing that we can do, and this is you can pay them. You write them a check and give the IRS the money that they ask for, and then the IRS will leave you alone. But the second thing you can do, we talked a little bit about this, is what they call an installment agreement. An installment agreement, it's like everything else that's with when you're having financial problems, whether it's bankruptcy or loan modifications or IRS problems. One of the first things that we want to do is review your information. So we want to look at your income. We want to look at what your expenses are and determine what you can afford to pay the IRS. Because just because you owe the IRS a lot of money, if you don't have the money to pay the IRS, well, then how are they going to get it from you? So you reach it, what they call an installment.
You're saying you can't get blood from a rock.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
That's what I told the IRS.
I've had a lot of clients tell me that. Well, how am I going to? I don't have any money. I also hear turnip. I don't know the difference between a turnip and a rock, but
neither one have blood.
That's true. I guess that's not a difference. That's a similarity. But so there's 2 types of installment agreements, and the first one is the full pay, and that's when you're going to pay the IRS everything you owe over a period of time. And sometimes it can go up to 72 months. So if I owed them $72,000 and I wanted to pay them over time, maybe I can reach out an agreement with them to pay $1,000 a month.
Can I ask you something? If I make an agreement with them for $1,000 a month, do I still have to pay the taxes that I'm owing now, or will that go off? You see what I'm saying? If I'm paying them, does that mean I'm paying them on top of what I owe them now?
Well, you have to pay. Part of the agreement of any installment agreement is that you're going to stay in compliance, which means from now on you're going to file your taxes on time, and you're going to pay taxes as they come due. And so all you're doing is paying the back taxes with this $1,000 a month. You still have to pay your taxes going forward. And I think that's a common question because people think, well, I'm paying the IRS $1,000 a month. Isn't that enough? And the answer is no, it isn't enough.
No, it isn't. I remember asking you when we were talking before, paying on time means even if you're going to ask for an extension, you have to what?
Well, you mentioned that because if I'm in an installment agreement, I can't ask for an extension. If I ask for an extension, then I have violated the agreement and they will call it in default, and then I'm right back where I started from. And so I can't ask for an extension, and I must pay on time. So by April 15th. And if I have a quarterly payments, I have to pay the quarterly payments on time as I'm in the installment agreement.
Now, we talked about quarterly payments before. Do we know that if you pay all of them at the end of the year and not to say, because like you said, there's not really any hard and fast rules for that.
Well,
which is why it's important to have it.
Here's the difference. Here's the difference, Jim. We were talking about quarterly payments for people who don't owe the IRS money.
Okay.
If I owe the IRS money, then I have to pay the quarterly payments on time, because if I don't pay them on time, then I'm in default of the agreement, and then they'll call it in default, and I'll be right back where I started from in the collection activities. So that was the first, what they call the full pay installment agreement. Now, the second type of installment agreement is what they call a partial pay. And a partial pay is where you're allowed to pay what you have left, what my disposable income is at the end of the month. So if my income is $5,000 and my expenses are $4,900, well, then I can pay $100 a month. Even if I owed the IRS $100,000, if I can prove that I only have $100 a month at the end of the month, they will accept $100 a month.
They will. Now, will they go on to your children when you die? I mean, I've never heard of the IRS say, well, that's okay, don't pay me. How is it that...
Well, that's a good question. And what happens is there's a statute of limitations on how long the IRS can collect a debt from you. And so, for instance, in my example, if I owed the IRS $100,000 and all I can pay them was $100 a month, I could pay that $100 a month for a year. That's $1,200. If I paid it for 10 years, that'd be $12,000. And then after 10 years, the statute of limitation would kick in, and I may not have to pay them the rest.
What was the key word there? Was may?
It depends on. There's a lot of depends, but usually
those are diapers.
Yes, that's true.
I'm sorry.
Usually, it will matter what kind of assets you have and things like that. But yes, they can fall off after 10 years. So sometimes I can't change what you owe the IRS, but sometimes we can change what you actually pay the IRS. And people sometimes have a difficult concept grasping that concept. Okay, so the third thing is on what they call an offer in compromise. And an offer in compromise is where the IRS agrees to take a lump sum for the amount that I owe. And again, this goes back to what my disposable income is and what my assets are. So if I have a lot of money in a 401k, and for instance, if I owe the IRS $40,000 and I have $50,000 in my 401k, the IRS will never accept an offer in compromise. The offer in compromise was one of the first programs that the IRS implemented in order to resolve IRS problems. But the success rate is something like 15%. Mm-hmm. So a lot of companies out there will get people in.
So you hear those commercials about I owed $100,000 and I ended up paying $1, and so those are the other companies that we talked about last week who are nationwide or something, and they're making everything seem as though, oh, this is nothing. We can just go and offer them, and you can walk away.
Exactly. And so it's, it's easy to sell that. If I told you, hey, you could pay the IRS pennies on the dollar. So where do I sign up? I want to get that deal. But what they don't tell you is very few people actually qualify. And so it may take a year, maybe longer, for the process to work through. And you're paying for this process that actually will never result in a a resolution to your problem. Mm-hmm. And one of the things about an offer in compromise is, I talked about that statute of limitations. It stretches out the statute of limitations. And so while they're considering my offer, the statute of limitations is not ticking away.
Now, I remember hearing from you that this was a kind of a new practice. There were a couple of years ago, or in the day, the IRS never compromised anything, never came to you, if they told you what to do, you had to do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's true. And then, again, that's what. So the offer, they've changed the offer in the last year and a half, and they've made it more palatable. And so make it easier to go through. So those numbers that I talked about, 15%, they probably climbed a little bit since then, but they're still not. They're woefully inadequate, I think, for most people to even consider an offer in compromise.
So that would be something. The reason why they talk to you and you go in there. Well, so we've gotten to the first three. On the other side of this, we'll come back and we'll get to the other three. But this is an important. These are important distinctions that people should understand, because those commercials really make it seem as though you could just walk in and don't worry about it.
That's right. So for more information about offers or anything that we're talking about here today, you can always visit my website at chicagotaxteam.com. I have videos on the website that explain this stuff. So you can also call me at 312-664-6649. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the other three things you could do.
You're listening to the IRS Radio Hour with attorney Stephen Leahy on AM 560 The Answer. Attorney Stephen Leahy brings his passion and expertise to your radio each and every week during the IRS Radio Hour. Tune in, take notes, and be educated. Learn your options resolving financial obstacles that face so many. And now, back to the IRS Radio Hour with your host, attorney Stephen Leahy.
Welcome back. I am your host, attorney Stephen Leahy. So on the other side, before we went to break, we were talking about the 6 things that you can do.
And we were on number 4.
Well, that's true. And, I think there was a little...
Well, we were on 3B. He's trying to throw me, ladies and gentlemen.
So there was, was one thing was the first thing you can do is pay the IRS. And the second thing was...
Oh, we're recapping now. Okay.
Yeah, the second thing you can do is come up with an installment plan, and that's kind of what threw Jim off, because there's 2 types of installment agreements. I didn't want to really throw them because there's actually a third type, but we'll talk about that another time. One thing about in the legal profession, we always have 1, 2, 1A, 1B, 1A.
You know why? Because you charge by the hour.
That's right. Actually, I never charge by the hour.
Oh, I
always have a flat rate fee. So it's like buying. So I always say when people go buy bread, they want to know how much it costs. When you go buy a lawyer, you should know what it's going to cost you.
Yeah,
it just makes sense. So let's talk about the fourth thing. And the fourth thing is and we talked a little bit about this before. This is currently not collectible status. And currently not collectible status, easy for me to say.
That's right.
Is a lot like that, the installment agreement, what they call partial installment agreement. If I do an analysis of your income and your expenses and there's money left, well, then I have to dedicate that to the payment to the IRS. But what if I do an analysis of your income and your expenses and there isn't any money left? Well, this is called the currently not collectible status. And
what does that do for you?
Well, this will keep the IRS away from you. They won't come collection. They'll put you, again, that's why it's called currently not collectible. They won't collect from you. Now, this is a temporary status. They will review it every year or 2 years, or if you have some change in income, some drastic change in income, they could come back at you and ask you to start making payments. And then they'll go through this analysis again and see how much money you have left now. Mm-hmm. But if nothing changes, then you can stay in currently not collectible status throughout the whole process of the statute of limitations.
Oh, does the statute of limitations still continue?
Absolutely, it does. Yes,
it does.
That's why it's such an important tool to use. Absolutely.
Okay, and
again, but you have to do the same thing that we were talking about in an installment agreement. You have to make sure you file your taxes on time. You have to make sure that you don't accrue any more back taxes. So as they come due, you have to pay them. And that's an important thing because I put people in currently not collectible status, and then they don't file next year. Well, I filed an extension, and the extension doesn't count. And so you have to keep pounding that home and pounding it home. And in my office, we have what we
So
call,
then would the statute of limitations have to start again? You'd have to go back through the whole process again. Go to the IRS and say, I'm still currently not. And would they, and whether they're in a good mood or not, whether they would allow you to do that again.
Well, it's again proving, and there can be a time when they just stop and they won't let you do it because you've defaulted too many times, and that could happen, you know. But again, in my office we have what they call we call it the IRS protection plan, and what that is we protect you from the future. So we make sure that your taxes are due when they come due. They're filed on time. That if you owe any money, that you understand that you owe that money and you'll pay it on time. So you can stay in the status that we work so hard to get you in. Because oftentimes we will work so hard to get you in this currently not collectible or in a partial installment agreement, and then people won't file their taxes, and they'll be right back in the same problem they have. So one of my goals is to stop that, stop the process, get you out of this problem, and prevent it from happening in the future. Now, the fifth thing you can do is you can file bankruptcy, and bankruptcy in itself and discharging taxes and bankruptcy is we
could do a whole segment.
Absolutely. We could do a whole show on it because it's a very difficult, it's a very complicated area of the law. And I think a lot of bankruptcy attorneys just kind of, gloss over it. Oh, you owe the IRS? Well, let's leave it to the IRS to determine whether they're dischargeable or not. But there are things you should, if you owe the IRS money and you're considering bankruptcy, you should have an attorney who understands both bankruptcy law and IRS tax resolutions. It's that important.
Is that you?
That is me. That's true.
Is that what you do? So
it is what I do.
Well, that's a good thing that you're here, then.
Because I try to put it all together. Now, the sixth thing you can do, and this is quick, it's you can continue to do nothing. And the IRS can come after you, and they can take things away from you, and they can go after your wages.
Will they do that?
Absolutely, they will. So that's an important thing. Again, most people that come to see me, that's what they've done for the last 3 or 4 years, because it does take the IRS some time to come after you.
But what did you just tell me? Once they come after you.
Well, it's like I told you, it's like a battleship. It takes them a long time to get their gaze on you, but once they get their gaze on you, they'll never let you go. So you can
gaze in the military.
You can come out to my website, chicagotaxteam.com. But call me too if you have any of these problems. You should always.
And how do they get in touch with you, Steve?
312-664-6649.
Is there a website they can go to?
I said chicagotaxteam.com. And if you have a question, IRS. It's questions at IRSradiohour.com. Again, it's questions at IRSradiohour.com.
See you on the other side.
Welcome back to the IRS Radio Hour with attorney Stephen Leahy. Stephen has helped hundreds of Chicagoans recover from financial disaster, and he wants to help you and your family. There are resolutions, and you will hear about all those resolutions during today's informative discussion on the IRS Radio Hour on AM 560 The Answer. Now, here's your host, attorney Stephen Leahy.
And we're back. And so we finished the 6 things. I think that, again, I can spend a whole show on each one of those 6 things.
And we will probably one time or another. Probably we'll go into the bankruptcy. I think that's important because people have there's that negative connotation about it.
Well, there is. And there's also a thought that you cannot discharge IRS debts in bankruptcy. And that's just not the truth. And I hear that a lot. So I didn't know you can discharge IRS debts in bankruptcy. But we'll talk about that.
Okay. Well, we're going to get into something that we've been talking about every week since we've been here. It's been the continuing story on this show. And it seems that there's new revelations coming out daily on this IRS and the targeting of Tea Party groups and Patriot groups, anything with Tea Party or Patriot. And now it seems it's found its way into the Congress of the United States, to the United States Senate, as a matter of fact. And one Carl Levin from Michigan has been found. They've found actually.
I always like to talk about this because from my side of the table, when I'm always talking to the IRS about my clients, they are like bulldogs coming after my clients and wanting information and demanding things and being unreasonable. And I always think it's amusing when they turn it around on them. But again, and it also involves what we call the Freedom of Information Act.
Yes, and it seems that the Judicial Watch, a group called Judicial Watch, had a FOIA, or a Freedom of Information Act, and got more information from the IRS than the Congress itself was able to get, the House of Representatives was able to get. And it seems as though there is now a trail that leads not from Cincinnati, the people who were thrown under the bus, and not just the people in Washington who were also thrown under the bus. It seems to now go into Congress. And I believe that there's a line coming right out of the White House.
The White House itself, and I agree with it. And, here, the problem with this is not really a partisan thing, because in Washington, the parties change. Sometimes the Republicans are in charge, and sometimes the Democrats are in charge. And it seems if we let one party get away with something like this, where they target their political enemies, then what's going to happen is eventually the other party is going to take over, and then they're going to target their political enemies. And so that puts us all at risk. So right now it's maybe the Tea Partiers, and I don't want to go into that whole Nazi thing.
No, I don't want to about they came after the.
That's right.
And no one cared, and there was nobody left for me.
That's right.
That's a good point. And the fact is that. We laughed about what kind of a people would put themselves under the power of the IRS, but the American people, at an astounding rate, pay their taxes. They follow the law. They pay their taxes. They don't have to be under like the East German Stasi or something. People actually do pay their taxes. They want to be up, but this right away takes away any kind of legitimacy that this. Once it's seen as a partisan act or a partisan branch of government, people will stop filing. People will. This is an important thing to we have rights, which is what you're here for as an attorney.
That's right. And most of my IRS clients, again, they owe the IRS money, but it's not because they don't want to pay the IRS. It's just that they've had some setback or something happen that made them owe the IRS money unexpectedly. So, for instance, people will get into some financial problems and start taking money out of their 401k in order to catch up, and then they don't realize that nobody took the taxes out of the 401k. And they find themselves with this big IRS bill at the end of the year that they didn't really expect, and they can't pay.
Or it's as Donald Rumsfeld said, we don't know what the law is. Nobody really knows. And once the IRS comes after you, it might be one agent says you're paid. Another agent could look at it and say, wait, this is not what that means.
And this kind of goes into the audits that we were talking about, and that they start auditing, and they start auditing people. And then that's another way that people unexpectedly owe the IRS money. So again, it's not that they're trying not to pay their taxes. They've paid what they thought they owed, but then they find out that they owe a lot more money than they thought. And when the IRS comes to get paid, they just don't have the money to pay them. And so it's not a nefarious. They're not trying to do wrong. They're not trying not to pay their taxes. Most of my clients say, I never thought I'd be here. I always paid my taxes on time, and I want to pay the IRS. I just can't at this time. And so that's why we come up with this plan to get you out of this debt problem with the IRS.
Well, as you were saying, there were things that used to be deductible that are no longer deductible. And we wanted to get into this in the next segment, but we can start in this segment about student loans. This is all in the news right about now. They're trying to figure, it's coming up in Congress, whether they're going to refinance them, whether they're going to, let everybody come back and refinance. The reason why they can't refinance now is because, they're no longer able to be taken off during. I'm not an attorney, but there is a huge problem with the student loans, and it affects our economy. It affects young people more, but it's also affecting older people who are trying to sell houses.
Well, that's true, and a lot of this does it affects the economy in a whole, because if I'm paying student loans, I don't have money to buy other things. And so we'll talk about that. I think we'll talk about that on the other side. If you have a student loan problem, though, and they're coming after you, you should call my office. It's 312-664-6649. Or any legal questions, give me a call. I'll be happy to answer. Or you can shoot me an email at questions at irsradiohour.com. Again, that's questions at irsradiohour.com.
Can they get you on Facebook?
They can. I'm on Facebook. It's Facebook/Opum Tax. OPEMTAX. Opum Tax.
See you on the other side.
You're listening to the IRS Radio Hour with attorney Stephen Leahy on AM 560, The Answer. Attorney Stephen Leahy brings his passion and expertise to your radio each and every week during the IRS Radio Hour. Tune in, take notes, and be educated. Learn your options resolving financial obstacles that face so many. And now, back to the IRS Radio Hour with your host, attorney Stephen Leahy.
Okay, hello. I was listening to the AC/DC there, and one day, Jim, I'm going to have to tell you the story of the first time AC/DC came to Chicago.
I was there.
You were there with me?
I was with you.
Wasn't that at the Riviera?
The Riviera.
Who did they back up that day, Jim?
A band called Detective.
But they didn't back up, I think.
No, they didn't.
What happened there?
That Detective came out first, and then AC/DC came walking out, and they had no, do you remember they had no,
wires,
bouncers, and he had no wire on his guitar, and we had never seen that. That was back in the day. That's the second time I've used that today.
You're getting old.
And they had no bouncers, and he got on Bon Scott's shoulders, who's now dead, and ran through the crowd, and it was stunning.
There was a lot of us there. There was probably 10 of us there, wasn't
11 of us from Arlington Heights, that's right.
It was an incredible show.
It was.
I can reminisce like this all day long. But let's talk about what we're going to talk about next.
Let's talk about it. Well, we were students then, so there goes a segue right into the student loan. We were talking about that on the other side before the last break, and it's been in the news a lot lately because Congress is going to try to refinance and because they need to try to reach out to the kids and get them interested in this election cycle. So why don't you give us a little bit of background about why there's such a problem? I think because the government's got its hands on it. Anything the government touches really turns into dust.
I agree with that. And, there was a time when you could discharge student loans in bankruptcy, just like every other debt there was. And so there weren't that many banks willing to loan to students because they would be discharged in bankruptcy. But they changed that rule, and then it went to 3 years. You had to be more than 3 years old before they were dischargeable. But now the rule is they're never dischargeable, and they follow you. I shouldn't say never. There is what they call a hardship discharge of student loans, and some of the courts are trying to lighten up on this requirement because this hardship discharge for student loans was that you had to be nearly destitute for the rest of your life before they would discharge them in bankruptcy. But now they're getting a little bit easier. So I think, again, we could take a whole show on student loans.
And we will one day. But, the major problem, I believe, is that you were, as you were telling me before, that a lot of people take out loans and don't finish college. So here you have all this debt, and you're not finishing, you don't get the benefits of having the education.
That's right, a debt that you can never get rid of.
Yes, and so you have people pushing you every day to go into an area that you really can't afford, and colleges are dying to have you in there because
that's right. And they want to fill it. That's right. Yeah. They get paid, and that's a big problem because the colleges are inflating their fees because there's a lot more people in line because there's a lot more money.
I just saw in the news this week the two highest areas that are going up yearly and have been for 10 years. One is colleges, and the other is medicine.
Wow. The two controlled by the government.
Yeah, what is the connection there? The minute the government touches it and guarantees something.
So we could talk about this stuff, and we will talk about them next week. And we have a lot more that, and we're looking for questions or suggestions from you. What do you want to talk about? I'm talking about my listeners, and so you should always send me a request or some questions at irsradiohour.com. Or you can go to my website, Chicago Tax Team. Now, remember that this show is also streamed. It's streamed on the Answer 560 website. It's also streamed on my blog at chicagotaxteam.com.
And we're here every Sunday at 5 o'clock.
I don't think we said that this week.
No, we haven't. So I'm going to say it again. We're here every Sunday at 5 o'clock. And we have to remember, the Hawks probably just ended. And so we hope that they won, and if not, still go Hawks.
Because we're recording this before the Hawks have played, so go Hawks. And we'll see you next week at 5 o'clock on 560 The Answer.